Hi, Kevin, Property Soldier here. I just wanted to do this short video on what I like to call the purchase to SA loophole. Now, I'm actually on a boat or a ship at the moment. I'm on a cruise, but you might be able to see the sea in the background. The camera is rocking a little bit from side to side, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So this loophole that I'm talking about on purchase to SA. Now, what do I mean by this loophole? Well, to give you a little bit of a background on how I discovered this loophole, and how I'm pretty sure you'll find pretty interesting too, is that over the years, 28 years plus now, I've been investing in property. And as most people do, started out with normal buy-to-let properties, moving into HMO, and also flipping properties, so buying and selling properties as well, doing buy, refurbished, refinance, so recycling the cash and carrying on and building up the portfolio. So 50 plus properties in the portfolio. Now then, the model that works the best with buy-to-let, just so I can explain where I am today, but the model that works best with buy-to-let is finding property that is in a pretty cheap area of town, but that still works well as an investment property, as a rental. Now, when I say pretty cheap, I don't mean in a really poor part of town where, you know, you're never going to be able to source decent tenants. The property is going to get trashed. You know, cars aren't safe outside. You know, I'm not talking about the really poor parts of town. I'm talking about not too far away from there, where you're still able to source good tenants. Now, you know, I'm not talking, this isn't a video about buy-to-let, but I just need to give you the background. Now, the sort of tenants I'm talking about are people that can still pass a credit check, and, you know, I was been careful over the years. I have guarantors, and the guarantors have to pass a credit check, own their own property, etc. So I'm still able to buy in those parts of town and find decent tenants. Now, don't get me wrong, every now and then a tenant would turn up like Mary Poppins and turn into Freddy Krueger, okay? But ultimately, that, you know, you take it on the chin with buy-to-let over the years. If you've got you know, multiple properties and you're doing it for long enough, you're going to end up, even if you've got, you know, checks in place, with the odd bad tenant. But by and large, you can still make it work, and you just take the bad ones on the chin. Now then, so these are properties that are in the parts of town that most people, you know, decent earners, decent income people, would not be wanting to live there. They want the fancier, leafy suburb parts of town. Now, the issue with those are that they don't cash flow very well as buy-to-let. So I'll give you an example. I can buy, and I have done it, in fact, the cheapest buy-to-let I ever bought was £35,000. Still got it now. But let's just say properties bought at £60,000. Now then, I can get properties at £60,000 that I can get £550 a month rent for. Now, you know, I won't go into calculating the yield and all that stuff, but it's an 11% yield. Now, let's say I'd have gone for a more expensive part of town. I might have ended up with something at 150,000, but I would probably only get about 700 rent for that property at 150,000. So that's actually a 5.6% yield. So I can literally get twice the yield from a property by going to the parts of town that aren't as sought after. But because I can do my safety you know, checks, if you like, on tenants, I can still get a decent standard of tenant by and large. And so that's the background. That's what I've been doing over the years. Now then, obviously a few years ago I started doing serviced accommodation, and I attended the courses and the trainings and things that were ongoing at the time. And what was being taught was waterside apartments, city centre apartments that work as serviced accommodation. And so, okay, I thought, yeah, fine, let's go and source those. And I did, and they were working fine and working well as serviced accommodation. True, more expensive to buy. So the thing that started to happen with me is I decided that, do you know what, I quite like service accommodation. I don't like dealing with the bad tenants when, you know, they do happen, having to evict people, etc. And so now I've got guests, not tenants. And especially with the recent tax changes, section 24, you know, buy to let, not as good for me. But with service accommodation, section 24 doesn't affect serviced accommodation, so I can still offset my mortgage interest, etc. So I decided I didn't want any more buy-to-let properties, and I was earning more money, a lot more cash flow from my service accommodation properties. But I'd get buy-to-let properties back, you know, either evicting a tenant, you know, on the odd occasion I had to do that, or they just handed the property back because they're moving on. And my dilemma was I didn't want to then fill the property again with more tenants. And so I thought, well, shall I just sell it and then reinvest into serviced accommodation type properties, what I thought worked as serviced accommodation type properties. And I thought, do you know what, I'm just going to give it a whirl. I'm going to I like to call them bog standard terrace properties. I'm going to give them a go as serviced accommodation. And so I refurbished them, you know, put decent furniture into the property. So I presented them nicely, so the photos would look nice on booking.com and Airbnb. But I didn't hide what the properties looked like from the outside, so I still showed the photo from the outside. So we're talking bog standard terrace property, and listed those on booking.com and Airbnb. And with my very first property, I was absolutely gobsmacked. In its very first month, very first sort of, you know, terrace type property, in its very first month, it cash flowed £1,000 or just over £1,000. The turnover was just under £2,000. And from that turnover, you're paying for your laundry, your cleaning and all that stuff. The cash flow, the profit was £1,000. And I just thought, wow, how did this happen? Well, what we did is we kitted the property out, and we presented it with single beds. And so we targeted the trades. Now the trades, they're motivated, they want to save themselves money on hotels. And so when they're going onto booking.com and Airbnb, and let's say there's 5 of them, that could be, you know, 3 hotel rooms, and yet they can stay in this instance, they could all stay in this house, three bed property. They could all stay in this house. You know, you've got a sofa bed in the lounge, you know, you've got 3 bedrooms. In one of the rooms, in fact, one of the rooms there's 2 single beds. And so they're all able to stay in that property, 5 of them. And that represents a significant saving on a hotel. And they've got their own lounge and they've got their own kitchen, which they don't get in a hotel. And so that's who were predominantly booking this property. And this was in the winter as well. It went live at the end of September, and this was in October. And the reason is that because trades need to work in your town, in your city. I like to rule of thumb, I like over 70,000 people. So if you're not in a town or city that's got over 70,000 people, then your service accommodation goldmine area might need to be in the nearest town that ticks that box. And trades need to work in those towns all year round. So there's all year round demand for trades who are obviously moving, coming from out of town in order to work in your town or your city. And so there's all year round demand for service accommodation, and so you will still get booked. And the thing that was really cool is we were also, and we have been also getting bookings from, you know, tourists, from families, etc. So all year round demand, but we'd be making more money in the summer months, which is pretty cool. Because the reason why you make more money in the summer months is because you've got all year round demand from the trades, but also you've got the tourist type or holiday maker type people that mostly travel in the summer, and that just puts the prices up because there's greater demand. The night rates go up, so you make more money in the summer, but you've got all year round demand. And so all of a sudden I realised that it's really cool to be using this type of property in with service accommodation as well. Now what's really cool about it is these bog standard terrace type properties, not in the fancy part of town, are cheap. They're really cheap to buy. Now I went out and I thought, wow, I'm just going to go and source a property that works as serviced accommodation in this type of area. And so I went out and bought a property. £90,000 purchase price, but it was 2 houses on 1 title. Needed a fair amount of work, so I spent £60,000 on the refurb, but it valued up at 230. And so I put a 70% serviced accommodation mortgage, so 70% interest only, 70% loan to value, interest only mortgage, appropriate for serviced accommodation against it, which gave me circa 161,000 back, which gave me all my money back and had about 70 grand's worth of equity in the property. So did the refurb, refinanced it, and got all my money back. Now, what's absolutely incredible, this is 2 houses on 1 title, is that I was able to cash flow £3,500, and I am on average each month cash flowing £3,500 from these 2 houses on 1 title. So one house is a 5-bed and the other house is a 2-bed. Now here is where the loophole comes in, is that the house, the front house, it was the 2 houses, it's got a front house and a back house, and the back house, the previous owner of these houses had used them both as buy-to-let, but the back house gave him significant problems because it wasn't really a very good property, didn't work well as a rental. And so why didn't it work well as a rental? Well, it's a 3-storey property, 2 pretty small bedrooms on the top floor, and the toilet on the ground floor, and really tall, thin, narrow property. And the other really weird thing about this house is that it was dark. It didn't have many windows, and the windows that there are close to some tall trees on neighbouring land that you can't cut down. And so dark, and you had to go down some steps to get round to the back of this property. Shared courtyard with the other house, and so the previous tenants used to fight, because they're sharing space, and people do, have disputes when they're sharing space with other people. And so it didn't really work well as a buy-to-let. Not very nice, not a sought-after area. And so the purchase price, really, really cheap. Not that attractive for an investor, not that attractive for an owner-occupier. And so we were able to purchase it really cheap for 90,000. And it wouldn't have worked well. We wouldn't have done it. We wouldn't have bought it for a buy-to-let. We definitely wouldn't have bought it to live in. But as serviced accommodation, it worked really well. Why would it work better as serviced accommodation than it would as buy-to-let? Because your guests are only staying for a short period of time. They're not going to be that bothered that it's a bit dark. They're not going to be that bothered that they've got to go down some steps, it's round the back. What your guests are more interested in is saving money on a hotel. And so the loophole that we've now discovered is that you can buy properties really cheap because they're not sought after as buy-to-lets, they're not sought after as properties to live in, but they still work perfectly well as serviced accommodation. Now remember how much cash flow I said that I was earning from these properties. 3,500, it's over 3,500 on these 2 properties per month. Cash flow, that's profit, that is not turnover. On properties that we've got all our money back out of, so that's an infinite yield. Now, £3,500 per month, how many of those would you need? Because this is absolutely incredible that we've managed to stumble upon this loophole. It was a bit of an accident in that just decided to give these buy-to-lets a whirl, but they worked really well, so went out and sought more property to do it with, and actually found one that wouldn't have worked as buy-to-let either, and so really, really cheap, and that's the sort of money we are making from it. So I hope you found that interesting. I'm pretty interested, and I'm interested in getting more and more of these type of properties. And so this is the sort of stuff that I'm teaching people all the time on my training courses. And so if that's the sort of thing that interests you, then have a look at my website, www.propertysoldier.co.uk, and if you're quick, you can actually get on a free training course. So I do offers where people can get on some of my training courses for free. So check out the website, have a look, and send me a message via my website, etc. I'd love to hear from you. Hope you found that useful, everybody, and as I always finish, here's to your success in serviced accommodation.